Welcome to Pharmaste NAPLEX Preparation Coach. Before we dive into the material, let's just take a moment to get centered. Take a really slow breath in and gently breathe out. Okay, today we are going to organize several important gram-positive antibiotics into clear, easy-to-remember patterns. Because let's face it, instead of trying to memorize every single detail randomly, it's so much easier if we connect each drug to its mechanism, its coverage, safety concerns, and monitoring. We're going to tackle this one class at a time, one clinical pearl at a time. Today, we will review antibiotics used for gram-positive infections, with special attention to MRSA, VRE, C. difficile, skin and soft tissue infections, pneumonia, bacteremia, and endocarditis.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to be covering 5 major antibiotic classes today: Vancomycin, the lipoglycopeptides, Daptomycin, the oxazolidinones, and finally, quinupristin/dalfopristin.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, vancomycin, which is really our glycopeptide standard.
Vancomycin is often the very first drug you'll think of for serious gram-positive infections in clinical practice, right? So how does it work? It works by inhibiting bacterial cell wall synthesis. Specifically, it binds directly to the D-alanine cell wall precursor, and by binding there, it physically blocks the peptidoglycan polymerization. It's like putting a cap on a building block so nothing else can stack on top of it. Now, for its spectrum, vancomycin covers your essential gram-positive bacteria. This includes staphylococci, specifically MRSA, as well as streptococci and enterococci. But, and this is a huge but, remember this absolutely crucial limitation: it does not cover VRE, or vancomycin-resistant enterococcus. That's a classic exam trap. Finally, while it is used for C. difficile, remember that is strictly via the oral route.
Now, when looking at the safety profile, which you know is heavily tested on the NAPLEX, the major warnings you need to flag are ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. You've got to use caution if your patient is on other nephrotoxic drugs, like aminoglycosides or loop diuretics. Another classic pearl is the vancomycin infusion reaction. You probably learned this previously as red man syndrome. It presents as a maculopapular rash, hypotension, flushing, and chills. To prevent this from happening, do not infuse it faster than 1 gram per hour. For monitoring, we track the AUC to MIC ratio, or a steady-state trough drawn about 30 minutes before the 4th or 5th dose. We're usually aiming for a trough of 15 to 20 for those serious infections. And I literally cannot emphasize this enough. The PO formulation does not cross into the GI tract for systemic absorption. It is exclusively for treating C. diff colitis in the gut.
Let's try a quick recall exercise to lock this in. A patient has a systemic MRSA infection, and their lab results show an MRSA MIC of 2 micrograms per milliliter or higher. What should you do? I'll give you a second to think about it. Well, if you said consider an alternative drug, you hit the nail on the head. When the MIC hits this threshold, clinical failure with vancomycin becomes a really significant risk, and we need to pivot to our other agents. Which leads us perfectly to our next section.
Section 2. The lipoglycopeptides, or as I like to call them, the -vancin relatives.
A very small structural change alters the pharmacology of these relatives completely. Like vancomycin, these drugs inhibit cell wall synthesis by binding to that D-alanine portion. However, because they have this added lipophilic side chain, they also disrupt the bacterial membrane potential and alter cell permeability. It's a dual mechanism. And because of this dual mechanism, they actually exhibit concentration-dependent activity, which is a key difference from vancomycin.
Let's break down the 3 main agents in this class: telavancin, oritavancin, and dalbavancin. The absolute most crucial point here for the NAPLEX is understanding their lab interferences. Check this out. Telavancin can falsely elevate APTT, PT, and INR. But, and this is a massive pearl, it does not actually increase bleeding risk. It's literally just a lab interference. Oritavancin takes this a step further. It can falsely elevate APTT for up to 120 hours. Because of this interference, IV unfractionated heparin is strictly contraindicated for 120 hours, which is 5 full days, after an oritavancin dose. Lastly, notice the dosing. Oritavancin and dalbavancin have extremely long half-lives, which is actually super convenient because it allows for single-dose IV regimens.
Moving right along to Section 3, Daptomycin, the cyclic lipopeptide.
Now we transition to a really vital tool for those severe, resistant gram-positive infections. Daptomycin has a very unique mechanism. It binds directly to cell membrane components, and it causes rapid depolarization of the bacteria. This immediately shuts down all intracellular replication processes, including protein synthesis, which leads to rapid cell death. So it has concentration-dependent activity. The major coverage pearl you need to know here, not only does it cover MRSA beautifully, but it covers both species of VRE. That's Enterococcus faecium and Enterococcus faecalis.
Okay, time for another recall question. And honestly, this might be one of the most frequently tested concepts in all of infectious disease pharmacology. A patient has MRSA pneumonia. Why is daptomycin strictly contraindicated for this infection? Pause for a second and think. The answer is that daptomycin is physically inactivated by lung surfactant. It will simply not work in the lungs. No matter how susceptible that MRSA isolate looks on paper, daptomycin cannot be used to treat pneumonia. Keep that locked in your memory.
Let's look at the safety profile for daptomycin. The biggest warning to keep on your radar is myopathy and rhabdomyolysis. Because of this risk, you absolutely must monitor the patient's CPK, or creatine phosphokinase levels, weekly. And you need to check this even more frequently if the patient has renal impairment or if they're taking other drugs that cause muscle damage, like statins. In fact, you should strongly consider temporarily withholding statins entirely during daptomycin treatment to avoid additive toxicity. Another unique, albeit rare, warning to know is eosinophilic pneumonia, which generally pops up about 2 to 4 weeks after starting therapy.
Here is a quick, high-yield compounding pearl for your actual pharmacy practice. When you're preparing IV daptomycin, specifically the brand name Cubicin, it is only compatible with normal saline and lactated ringers. It is strictly incompatible with dextrose. You'd be surprised how often this comes up. Recognizing these basic compatibility patterns will save you crucial points on the exam and keep your patients safe in the real world.
All right, let's keep the momentum going. Section 4, the oxazolidinones, which are Linezolid and Tedazolid.
These are fantastic drugs, and they shift our focus away from the bacterial cell wall and membrane over to the ribosome. The mechanism here targets the 50S subunit of the bacterial ribosome. By binding there, these drugs inhibit translation and protein synthesis entirely. Their spectrum of activity is very similar to vancomycin, giving excellent coverage of MRSA, but just like daptomycin, they have the added benefit of covering both VRE species, E. faecium and E. faecalis.
Now, linezolid is notorious for its drug interactions, and you need to know them. It is actually a reversible monoamine oxidase inhibitor, an MAOI. Therefore, you must avoid using it within 2 weeks of other MAO inhibitors, or serotonergic drugs to prevent serotonin syndrome. You also need to advise your patients to avoid tyramine-rich foods for the same reason. Additionally, use real caution in diabetic patients who are on insulin or oral hypoglycemic drugs, like sulfonylureas, because linezolid can actually exacerbate hypoglycemic episodes.
The monitoring parameters for linezolid are highly duration-dependent. If a patient is on it for more than 14 days, you really need to watch out for duration-related myelosuppression, specifically thrombocytopenia. Because of this, a weekly CBC is required. Now, if they are on it for more than 28 days, the risk profile shifts over to peripheral and optic neuropathy. And here's a super practical clinical pearl. The IV to PO ratio is 1:1. This makes it incredibly easy to transition patients to oral therapy for discharge. Oh, and if you are dispensing the oral suspension, make absolutely sure you put a do not shake label on the bottle.
And we've made it to our final class, Section 5, quinupristin and dalfopristin, the streptogramin.
Let's wrap up our antibiotic tour with this combination drug. It's generally reserved as a last-line agent for very specific, highly resistant infections. Like the oxazolidinones we just talked about, this drug binds to the 50S ribosomal subunit to inhibit protein synthesis. It does cover MRSA, but I want you to pay very, very close attention to its VRE coverage. It only covers vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus faecium. It does not cover E. faecalis. This is a vital distinction from daptomycin and linezolid, which, if you remember, cover both.
So why is this drug generally reserved as a last resort? Well, the answer really lies in its tolerability and strict administration rules. It is notorious for causing phlebitis, which can occur in up to 40% of patients. To avoid this, it really should be administered via a central line, such as a PICC line. Furthermore, remember how daptomycin required normal saline? Well, quinupristin/dalfopristin is the opposite. It must be diluted in D5W only. Finally, just keep in mind that it's a weak CYP3A4 inhibitor, which means it can raise the levels of other drugs like calcium channel blockers or cyclosporin.
Let's test your knowledge one last time. A patient receiving quinupristin/dalfopristin complains of severe joint and muscle pain. Is this an expected adverse effect? Yes, it absolutely is. Arthralgias and myalgias are incredibly common with this medication, affecting up to 47% of patients. Knowing this helps you properly counsel patients, and it prevents unnecessary expensive diagnostic workups when these expected symptoms arise.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground today, right? Everything from vancomycin's strict AUC monitoring to daptomycin's inactivation in the lungs and linezolid's duration-dependent toxicities. The key to mastering this material isn't rote memorization. It's truly understanding the clinical rationale behind each warning, every drug interaction, and every compatibility rule. So I want to leave you with this final thought. When you're sitting there and you look at a patient case on the NAPLEX involving a gram-positive infection, what patterns will you rely on to choose the safest, most effective drug? Keep building those connections in your mind. Keep up the excellent work, and I'll see you in the next explainer.